Well, we might as well get ourselves started. We'll still have some people join while I'm doing the introduction. I'm Dan Jurenko, Tennessee Alliance for Progress. Welcome to the New Green Economy Compass Conference. Our other major co-sponsors are the Nashville Peace and Justice Center and the Wendland Cook Program in Religion, Labor, and Ecology at Vanderbilt University. We have another perhaps 20 some great community groups that are co-sponsoring the conference. And this is not just a conference to watch, but it's really a conference to learn so we can move into action afterwards and organize and throughout the greater Tennessee area. And so we will be joining with groups like this Southeast Climate and Energy Network and others to really put up a challenging front for green energy, for energy justice, and for well-paying green jobs. So just a few things on your view screen. Most of you are probably familiar with Zoom, but if you're not, at the top right corner, there's a view screen. It says view. You can click on that, and you probably want to click it to speaker. And so you're not seeing everybody, but you're seeing the speaker. Everybody will be muted unless we open you up to ask a question towards the end. And we have something, there's always something with Zoom. A lot of people are being named Aaron Stauffer. He's our tech person who set this up, but some people coming through the Zoom link are named Aaron Stauffer. And so please rename yourself if you could, so we know who's on the Zoom. You can do that by clicking your name or clicking the three dots on your window and just follow the prompt to rename yourself unless you want to be Aaron Stauffer for the night. Just a heads up, we are recording, so if you don't want to have your face broadcast across the nation, we suggest that you stop your video. So I'm going to turn it over to Abigail Franks, our great facilitator from the Southeast Climate and Energy Network. Take it away, Abigail.
All right. Hey, y'all. I know he said that y'all can turn off your cameras, but I do love seeing all of y'all's faces. Like he said, my name is Abigail Franks, and I am the programs coordinator and outreach coordinator for both the Southeast Climate Energy Network and also the People's Justice Council. And I am super pumped to facilitate this workshop. I'm really excited to hear about what Daniel and Jason have to say. And if possible, could y'all both introduce yourselves to the group?
I'll do age before beauty. So I'm Jason Carney. I president and CEO of Energy Electives and president of Tennessee Solar Energy Association.
So Jason's already starting off with a big lie in front of the whole crowd, I see, but I appreciate those kind words about my beauty. My name is Daniel Tait, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at Energy Alabama. We're a nonprofit organization that works to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy here in the state, and I am physically based in Huntsville.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. So to start off, we would all love to hear more about what your organizations do. So we want to know more about like the projects that y'all are doing at the moment and how has COVID affected that within the past year and a half, it feels like. We'll start with Daniel.
Yeah, sure. So, we kind of our work is in three main buckets as an organization, one being education. And for us, that's everything from K through 12 all the way through, all of us cantankerous adults, right? As we move beyond the K-12 and collegiate world. So we do all types of stuff like, workshops for homeowners, and we're teaching third graders, and like you name it, we're out there doing it in terms of education. A second big kind of pillar of our work is advocacy or policy, however you kind of want to phrase that, but effectively trying to get good policy passed at the state and local level Also, in many cases in Alabama, and I'm sure this is like this in other states as well, getting bad policy off the books, right? So we have, quite a few of those we've got to fix. And I said state and down. So for us, that's usually city, county, and state. As many of you are probably aware, especially considering where we're all at. TVA is kind of a quasi-federal utility, right? And it covers almost all of the state of Tennessee, but also portions of many other states. So we as an organization kind of de facto do some regional work, right? Because of the work we do based on TVA. And then the third kind of pillar or leg of our work is really around technical assistance. And with technical assistance, if I go out and preach the gospel of sustainable energy, eventually somebody's going to raise their hand and say, and Daniel, I love what you're talking about. How do I go make that happen? And in many cases, in a kind of a nascent economy of these types of things in Alabama, there wasn't someone we could readily point them to. And I couldn't just say, well, I'm glad that you also agree that these things are good, but go have fun and good luck doing them. So in many cases, we step in, especially for government agencies or other nonprofits, and trying to, help them actually save energy or actually, execute renewable projects. So that's kind of the main work we do. And then I'll just say one last thing about kind of COVID-19 and how it affected our work. I'm glad you asked that. For us, there was one thing that kind of jumped out, and that was this issue over shutoffs and disconnections. And there's been a lot of great work across the country, in different regions, but also some national groups that have been, really shining a spotlight on this issue. And, we took action here in Alabama, and I know many others did as well. And I appreciate those groups that helped us here in the state and did this elsewhere, and trying to stop disconnections for people happening to people who were affected by COVID-19. People were out of work, still out of income. We got, utility bills piling up. We have these major, in many areas of the state, investor-owned utilities that are sending billions of dollars back to Wall Street and to the investors. Meanwhile, we got tens of thousands of Alabamians that are getting their power shut off during COVID-19. So it's a big issue that kind of always existed, but because of COVID-19, right, it really put a spotlight on that issue that, we talk about energy justice or environmental justice. And I mean, just actually having access to it, the product of energy, right, is like the most fundamental justice issue of all. And that really shined a bright light on that. So enough rambling for me, and Jason, take us away.
Sure. So just to be clear, Daniel put my name next to the big lie. Do not associate my name with the big lie. That's we'll give that to our former president. But I am, as I said before, I'm the founder of Energy Electives and also president of Tennessee Solar Energy Association. And kind of the three legs that I, as an individual, which kind of manifests itself in the organizations I run, kind of stand on is energy efficiency. So solar energy and then advocacy. So as far as energy efficiency is concerned, we're doing all the things to make your home more efficient, to reduce the demand and the load, such that we can get to my passion of which is solar. I'm always kind of present myself more as an energy consultant. We want to go in and do an audit and look at what is needed, and we somewhat humbly say we partner with TVA and some of their programs. They have an e-score program that pre-COVID and is actually, I'm not ashamed to say it's actually a good thing for Energy Electives that TVA has this program, because pre-COVID they would come out to your home, do an audit, kind of a visual audit. They didn't go as deep as we will go when we do an audit, but do an audit, give you a score for your home, an energy score, and then homeowner would then have the opportunity to look at a list of quality contractors in their system, of which we are one, to come and provide an estimate or bid to do the work. So what's been the best part of that program is that they do it, it's free when they come out and do it. They do a pre and a post inspection. So it's really great as far as them coming back and saying, okay, the work that was done is up to our standards. So it provides a lot of assurances with the work that we do. But as I said, that's kind of the precursor to my passion, which is solar energy. As I was learning about solar energy and learning how expensive it can be and how unaffordable it can be for average folks, I started to make sure that a part of my presentation is, hey, you can, get more quote unquote bang for buck, a faster return on your investment if you do energy efficiency first. I like, for imagery's sake, I like to say that you can either buy the skinny jeans first, then lose the weight, or you can lose the weight and then buy the skinny jeans. So either way, solar can only do so much. It's finite, like those jeans. It's only going to cover so much. And so as we're trying to get to net zero, the idea is to do both: reduce your demand, reduce your consumption, and then put on a nice shiny solar system that I'd love to sell you. And to that point, I found, as I was doing research about this in grad school, that a lot of people just didn't know what solar was. A lot of folks from the 70s who were kind of coming along in the 70s, of which I can see no one was around back then. But back then, there was a lot of solar thermal. And so people think when you talk solar that you're talking increasing the heat in your water through solar. But these days we're talking more solar PV, which is electricity, making electricity from solar. So a lot of education we needed to do. Some people had no idea, period, that you could make electricity from solar panels. So if I'm not doing solar, I've done a lot of education in the community, in my own community. Whites Creek High School started a program there. It caught the attention of NPR, and there's a article out there about that. And then here recently, as an extension of that program, I'm doing a project where we're going to try to educate folks through a installation in a community, an African American community. The studies show that even when you correct for income, African Americans don't adopt solar at the same rate as whites and other groups. So we want to start putting some of those in the community just to see what the effect is. So we've got some donations of equipment, we've got donations of funds, and if you would like to donate, Tennessee Solar Energy Association has a donate button where you can participate in that. And then the third leg is advocacy, which that's where the TSEA comes in. We want to celebrate and educate as many people as we can, many Tennesseans as we can, around solar and its benefits. So that project that I just spoke of is also going to be, it's also being sponsored by TSEA. So those are kind of the three, like as Daniel said, you have to stay abreast of what's happening in the utility world because solar is largely governed by the utility world. So I'm constantly trying to stay abreast of what's happening with TVA and NES and the like. But yeah, that's the three, energy efficiency, solar, and advocacy.
Awesome. I really love how both of y'all's work kind of intertwine, and you have those three main branches of education, advocacy, and implementation, whether it be actually installing solar panels or trying to get certain policies implemented. It's really cool to see that. But could y'all educate us about what energy jobs are and what its role in the economy is? We can start off with you, Jason.
One more time, the question again, Abigail.
So how would you define energy jobs and what would you say its role in the economy is?
Yeah. So, energy, I actually, as I was kind of building my chops around energy, I got a really broad understanding of energy. So I worked with the state of Tennessee in the energy office. and unfortunately, you couldn't focus purely on renewable energy. So there are energy jobs in a lot of different places, and one that the state has to keep abreast of is the kind of oil and gas industry as far as energy jobs. The state of Tennessee only has one refinery in Memphis, and it only has really one other pipeline that comes out of Texas through kind of those southern states, and then comes up through Chattanooga into our airport. So any disruptions down the line can be catastrophic. So those are energy jobs. But there's also the ones that I love, which are renewable energy jobs. So those are, as I said, to me, that I define that as, any energy is meant to do work. And so if we can do something that's active work, as in solar PV, or if we can take away the need for that work to be done, I still see that as an energy job. So whether it's conservation or production around the idea of getting work done, that's an energy job, in my opinion.
That's a really interesting perspective. Thank you very much, Jason. What about you, Daniel? How would you define energy jobs, and what would you say their role in the economy is?
Yeah, I would say, well, I mean, in terms of the role of the economy, it's the backbone of our economy. Like our modern economy runs off of energy, right? Whether that's moving people or electrons, like literally everything is powered now. And I think we kind of realize that when power goes out for longer than just a second, all of a sudden, and then I got to reset all my devices and my life is a pain. And so we kind of realize sometimes, I think, how dependent we are. In terms of how I would define energy jobs, I think of it as a little, everything Jason said, but I like to think of it as, when I got into the field, I always told people I didn't go to school for this. Like literally my degree is in international trade. It has nothing to do with what I do now, right? And you can go back and try to find, like, where are you going to find an energy degree? It doesn't really exist, right? Energy is embedded into everything that we do. There are things like electrical engineering that we kind of think of as, okay, this is straight up energy, but it's in everything, and then also everything is in it. And so what I mean by that is saying that, oftentimes we think of just the solar installer, or we think of the person who's doing the maintenance on a wind turbine, but there have to be people who manage those projects. There have to be people who sell those projects. There have to be people who finance those projects. There also have to be people who build electric vehicles, and those are energy jobs, right? And those can be manufacturing. So, I mean, like literally every single step of the way that you would have in any other industry exists in energy as well. And so I like to encourage people that whatever skill set you have can be put to use in the energy economy, because we're going to need it all in order to kind of make this thing go. So
That's awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Well, since we are talking about jobs, I do want to bring up the fact, like Jason mentioned earlier, about how, we still kind of rely on some like fossil fuels and such. A lot of people are worried about the loss of jobs that center around fossil fuels as we transition to the green economy. Should people be worried? And what can be done to make sure that people aren't left behind as we transition to renewable energy? We can start off with you, Daniel, and then go to Jason.
yeah, I mean, flat out, yeah, people should be concerned. I mean, there's no doubt that anyone who is being, this is my personal opinion here, but I think that anybody who's being intellectually honest has to admit that this transition, just like any other transition that's ever occurred in the history of this country, will result in some job losses in certain places, certain industries, and that we as a society are making a decision that the upside is so much greater that we have to do this, right? That does not absolve us of our responsibility, right, to make sure that those things are taken care of. Those folks are taken care of who helped us in the in the old energy economy. So I always say that to say that, yeah, these things are real. There will be job losses, and in fact, there already have been. And we need to do better about how we bring those folks along. I mean, one of the more recent policy proposals that I think is pretty helpful in this front is making sure, I can't remember the exact percentage, I think 40% is what I've heard, in terms of all of the money and the resources that we're going to be spending in helping this transition, that 40% are being spent in disadvantaged and impacted communities. And that includes many of the communities, right, who were part of the old energy economy, that we need to make sure we're bringing them along into the new energy economy. So I think that, it's a real thing. We got to definitely make sure that we're investing in people to bring them along, because ultimately, I know we may get into this a little bit later in the conversation, but if we don't do this right and make sure that we're taking care of folks, that's going to be our biggest headwind, like into the future, right? Is that that's where political resistance, that's because it's not just political resistance, it's real resistance. Like, we have to take care of people in this process, or we're going to really harm our ability to make this transition that we all need, economically, socially, and environmentally.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to exacerbate any existing social issues that we're having, especially for disadvantaged and marginalized communities that kind of have to, some of them feel like they have to choose between working in this job that may be dangerous for them, such as like with the pollution and stuff, and getting food on the table for their families. So making sure that people are taken care of is very important. What about you, Jason? What do you think?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking through all the things that Daniel was saying there, and largely agreeing with it all. And I guess I would just add that I think that it kind of starts and ends with me with what Daniel ended with just taking care of people. We have to allay folks' fears, and help them to understand, that it's not as bad as you might think. And if we don't do that, I don't think again, he said it all. I mean, the political resistance that can come from not allaying folks' fears could stymie the transition, right? So if people are afraid, then whoever stands up and says, we're not going in that direction, we're going to bring back coal, that person's going to win, and then the transition is not going to happen. And we all need the transition to happen. The entire planet needs the transition to happen. So I think it's very important that people are first in educating, and not just educating, but like literally, if there are, if there's a way to do what we're doing now with, doing some type of stimulus that undergirds these folks as their jobs and industries are kind of being phased out. And I'll say this from my perspective, I'm not an economist or anything like that. So you have to take what I say with, a grain of salt, but I don't personally think there's any real fear for those that are already pick a year into that industry. If you're 25 years, 30, 35 years in, you're on the way to retiring, you're on the way to kind of exiting out of that industry anyway. And it's going to take that much time for us to fully transition away anyway. We're not going to be 100% electric tomorrow. So, but if you are, in college or just starting in one of these fossil fuel industries, if we keep going in the direction that we need to go in, not just that we are going in, but we need to go in, then yeah, you should be afraid if you're thinking you're gonna, have a future in, the fossil fuel economy, the extraction economy, because there are people like us and many more every day that are working as hard as we can to save the planet, create jobs in a different industry that doesn't clog up our lungs or get us exposed to coal ash. And we truly care, and we're serious, and we're not going anywhere, and that's a real thing. So as I said, I'll end with what I begin with. I think there's not as much to fear as, it could be, pushed out there. But we do need to make sure people's fears are, that fear is validated so they don't think they're crazy, but also to kind of massage those fears with the idea that we're going to, our government is going to look out for you and help this transition.
Yeah. I think if we just let everyone who's afraid come to you, Jason, and you kind of let them know everything's going to be okay, people would they would calm down a little bit. But I think something that's very interesting about both of y'all's points is y'all mentioned like the resistance that comes with like the renewable energy transition and a green transition in general. So could y'all both expand on like what the biggest obstacles to expanding renewable energy is? We can start with you, Jason, and then go to Daniel.
I'm knee deep in renewable energy, so I'm all in, and all the research that I've done. As I said, I did a thesis around introducing solar energy to the green economy to the African American community through solar energy. And Mark Jacobs, professor out at Stanford, and many other scholars say that the only issue we have is policy. We've got technology. You see that when the stakes are high, we know how to kick in financing, and we know how to create opportunities. But that's never more true than here in Tennessee, where TVA dominates the energy landscape. So I wish there was, in my mind, another way to say it. I mean, education, we can do that. I believe that's right at our fingertips. But as far as the biggest hurdle, it's just moving policy. I mean, we've got examples all around the country of successful programs. Green Mountain, I think in Vermont, is a great example of what a utility can do when it wants to see renewable energy and energy conservation. And you've got places in Minnesota that have great community solar programs. And that's kind of littered all around the country. The policy that Nashville just enacted, which is around 100% renewable energy, that Freddie O'Connell introduced and got passed a couple years ago, I think it was. That was modeled off of Washington, D.C.'s RPS. So there are examples everywhere of how to do this stuff. It's not that we can't, it's just that we don't have the will right now in the places that matter, that can actually make a change. So I think that's the biggest hurdle, is just getting in new thoughts, better policy in the right places.
As a policy nerd, I completely and totally agree. Thankfully, like you said, there are definitely policies out there that we've seen work. So all we have to do is just make it work here. What about you, Daniel? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Jason is saying. And, I go a step further and even name some names. I mean, I'm going to say that, look, the utilities, flat out, the utilities are a big barrier to what we're trying to do. And a lot of it has almost less to do with renewables than it does about monopoly control. Utilities themselves are monopolies, usually around the country. They're government-backed monopolies that were granted by the state. So like Alabama Power, where I'm at, in our state, they have a monopoly license, right? That's granted by the state of Alabama. TVA is very similar. It may be a federal utility, but it's very similar in that nature. Whereas what Jason and many of us are talking about is much more of a decentralized type of system, or at least more decentralized than we have now. So you have this fundamental battle of business models, right? That is, take the technology almost away. It's, do I, as the monopoly who have controlled the world for 100 and 150 years, continue to get to control the world for the next 100 and 150 years, or will I lose power? And I think that's really where a lot of the battle lines are being drawn. And so, unfortunately, because of that, utilities are often fighting a lot of the policies that we need. I'm personally of the belief that we literally need every scale of every carbon-free technology we can get. Like, the challenge is so big that we need utility scale solar, we need community scale solar, we need residential solar, we need energy efficiency at every scale. And a lot of times you may see action from a utility where they'll say, "Oh, but we love solar," but it'll only be that bucket of, well, it's the utility scale solar, right? They own control, and nothing for residential or community solar. So I think that's a big issue. And then just larger issue, but related, is one of money in politics. And it's not just the utilities, but often just fossil fuel interest in general, right, that are driving a lot of these campaign contributions, and this bifurcation that you're seeing where it's got to be an us versus them, a green versus black, or I should say green versus fossil fuel type of economy. So and that's not the case at all, but it's driven by a lot of money in politics. Many times, utilities are willing contributors in part of that, but those two dynamics, I think, really are really harming and slowing the ability for us to make faster progress.
Mhm. That kind of brings up a question. I don't mean to catch y'all off guard, but I am genuinely curious about this. What would y'all say as like a way to counteract the monopoly control they have? Like, if we could talk, if you had like 10 minutes with the utilities, well, more like an hour. If you had like an hour with the utility CEO, what would y'all say to them, if that makes sense? Like, hold on, let me back up. I get really excited, and so sometimes I speak before I even like finish my thought. What I really want to say is, how do we combat utility monopoly power? And if you could talk to a CEO, what would you say? And y'all can jump in whenever y'all are ready, because I did
Uh,
kind of just throw that at.
well, unfortunately, I don't really have a great answer to that question, but I do think that it is different based on the type of utility it is. So, for instance, if you have a public utility, something that continues to baffle me, right, is that in the case of, say, TVA, or a local utility that is owned by the city or is owned by the federal government or the state, this none of what we're talking about here really makes sense. There really should not be this issue of picking between a monopoly, like, I gotta please my investors on Wall Street, versus the regular folks. Like, the regular folks in these cases literally own the utility, right? So that's a tougher conversation to break through, that they don't have a vested interest from a financial perspective, like, say, an investor-owned utility does, right? So I think it's harder, and which is why I think you see a lot of people. I should back up and say, a lot of people ascribe to the theory that we need more public power because of this exact type of, well, maybe not the exact type of thing, but one of many issues, right? That you need more direct control and more voice from regular people, and you can only achieve that with public power. In an investor-owned utility, I think it's harder to get them to break that monopoly mindset unless there is a financial incentive. You do see some states around the country that are attempting to do that, right? Where they're saying, oh, well, if you invest in smaller scale solutions, there's a way for the utility to profit. And so then when that happens, you see more willingness on the part of the investor-owned utility to do that, because they're really in a profit game here, not necessarily like, I care about a particular solution. They're just looking for ways to maximize profit. But again, back to the public power version or model, I don't know that I have a good answer, because you would think they would naturally be inclined to care less about the profit motive and more about driving savings and jobs and things like that to the local community, whereas there has been kind of a disconnect on that. And many public power agencies around the country, including many here in the Tennessee Valley, that's not always the case, but it seems to have been that way pretty heavily here in the TVA region recently.
Yeah. So my thoughts are completely colored by the idea that I've never lived in another area outside of TVA region. So it may be different, out west, they're, I would say 10, 15, 20 years ahead of us with as far as renewables. It's a different situation because it's not federally subsidized, so there's just it's just different situation in different areas. But from my perspective in this area, I think, I look at two things. One, I'm talking to the utilities and I'm saying, you have a chance to be a hero. You have a chance to do the right thing and have your legacy look a certain way. This isn't, as I said before, this isn't going anywhere. The world is transitioning, and you can continue to be resistant to that, and always have to hide behind shadows and halls of mirrors, as they do with everything. Or, you can take the, I guess, brunt now, of maybe going against some of your peers. But in the long term, you're going to look, like a pioneer and, look like that you actually got it, all those years ago. So that's, kind of the conversation that I would have with utility heads. But beyond that, I think that the way to combat it, if they're completely resistant, we've been having these conversations, is you've got to it's death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, if everyone continues to transition over and over again, they're just not going to be able to stem that tide. For example, TVA is very much about business. Even the city of Nashville, you talk to them, well, what do the business leaders say? Can you get a business person to sign on to this legislation? That's all they care about is the business community, it seems. And so Facebook and Google and Amazon come in and they say, we want to be 100% powered by renewable energy. And if you don't, then we're not going to bring our business and those jobs and the economic development to the valley. So guess what do? They do? They say, sure, we'll give it to you. Great, we'll do whatever you say. But if, lowly resident, native of Nashville, who actually loves this city, loves this state and this region of the country, comes and says, TVA, I want programs for it so that I can do solar. They say, well, who are you? We don't care what you think. So that's where we've had these conversations in the Sustainability Council, Mayor Sustainability Council. It's who are the top 10 users of electricity, and see we convince them to do exactly what Facebook and Google have done, to just go to TVA or NES and say, we want to use all renewable power, and we are Vanderbilt, or we are Bridgestone, or we are Nissan, and that's what we want. And if you don't, then there are going to be consequences. So we have power over those companies because we buy their products. So if we say, hey, we're only gonna, if you're not using 100% renewables or on that, have a plan in place, to be transitioning over, then we're going to start going to your competitors, or we're going to find someone who does. So I think it's, as far as being able to break up that monopoly power, it's so hard to just go and walk in a room and tell TVA anything. You can't. President after president has said they're going to sell TVA and all that, and it doesn't, Republican or Democrat, they've said it, and they don't have the power to do it, actually. So who has the power to actually do it in a singular person? I don't think anyone kind of does. Congress as a whole does. And I guess in some way the president, he went and cleaned out a bunch of TVA board members, so he has that kind of power. But since that's very difficult to come by, I think we should all, kind of continue to encourage and exhort these big companies to demand more of our utilities.
Yeah, and I just want to add something to what Jason said about the death by 1,000 cuts, because this is happening like in front of our faces with TVA, right? And you have this case where, some local power companies and some corporations want more than TVA is willing to give at the current moment, and they're not transitioning fast enough, and is leading to high wholesale power costs. And will some of the local power companies leave the Tennessee Valley Authority region, leave the TVA region, stop buying power from TVA? And so the whole business model issue is a real one, and utilities can slow it down, but and they can be effective at putting some serious brakes on it. But at the end of the day, I think Jason's really hitting at something important, right? Is that we're now at a spot where the economics are what they are, and they're just getting better for clean technologies. They can't stop it forever. They can slow it down a good bit, and they definitely can make sure that the transition does not happen fast enough for us to stave off the worst effects of climate change, which is a terrible outcome for us for a variety of reasons. But they can't stop the transition forever. And it will happen whether they like it or not. And you're starting to see some of these things happen that really drive to the heart of the business makes question. Does this system really make sense? Or how do we reform it in such a way that makes sure that everybody can actually benefit without tearing it apart and losing everything in the process? It's not like it's an easy problem to solve. I'm not going to try to gloss over it, but I unfortunately, I think in a world that's dominated by monopolies, it seems as though without ever having had to face competitive pressures before, that they're either unable or unwilling to kind of face that challenge down, right? Until the cuts are almost too much to take and it collapses. And so that's what I worry about. That's kind of what keeps me up at night, right? Is when will they wake up? Will they wake up too late? And in which case there could be severe consequences for all of us because they didn't wake up in time.
Man, that is definitely some food for thought. Thank y'all for going above and beyond with answering that question, as jumbled as it was at first. So I actually wanted to open the floor for the final 15 minutes that we have. I've seen some really great questions in the chat. If y'all are okay with it, I would love to get those answered. Are y'all down with that?
Sure.
Okay, so Betsy asked, would subsidies and tax breaks like oil and gas help the transition of utilities? And y'all can jump in with whenever.
Yeah, I'd say, absolutely. We've got a subsidy with the ITC with solar, and I guess I learned PTC is for wind, but we've got that, and it's kind of buoyed the solar industry. Anytime it went from 30% to 26%, and then just recently it held at 26, although it's supposed to go down to 22. But the industry was advocated so very hard to keep it at 26 that we know that it works. We know that people will invest when they see that they're getting some assistance. And then we know, gosh, I like to be a balanced and fair person, but I just can't talk balance when I talk about the fossil fuel industry. I mean, they get subsidies. They don't even need subsidies. They get subsidies and they make money whether the economy is good or bad. So I think that for sure, if we could get subsidies on the level that the oil and gas industry got, then we would definitely win, because we know now that parity has already been lost to the renewable energy industry. If you took away subsidies from both industries, renewable energy would win. So it's definitely a good tool, to spur the industry. And for sure, if they were on the same level, then renewable energy would win out every time.
I would only add one thing. I mean, so yes, everything Jason said is 100% right. I would add that because the tax credit has been around for quite some time for solar and wind and things like that, number one, there are a few things that are not, incentivized to the same level. Things like energy efficiency doesn't get as much, boost there from our tax code, geothermal. So there's lots of other clean technologies that we really need to make sure are being rewarded by the tax code. Especially to the extent that the fossil fuel industry, like I always tell folks, like if you're going to give a subsidy, then we should get the same that everybody else will get, or everyone gets nothing at all. Jason made the really good point that if we just stripped all subsidies away from all types of energy sources, renewables and clean technologies would win hand over fist. So, let's level the playing field for once. And then the second thing that I wanted to kind of bring up beyond the tax equity issue is that there's only so much tax equity out there, right? And not that these mechanisms are bad, but we're advocates for things like third-party ownership, which allow other types of organizations like nonprofits and churches, local governments to actually access those tax equity benefits, or you can change it to where rather than just tax credits, there are other ways to make sure that tax exempt entities like governments that we're all taxpayers of can access those same benefits, and that's usually through cash grants. So ways to turn the tax credits into grants so that we can actually widen the amount of people that are eligible for these benefits, because not only is it schools and nonprofits and churches and things like that we want to have access, but we want low and moderate income families to be able to have access to it. Well, if they don't have enough taxable income every year for that tax credit, would they be better served by a direct cash grant? Quite likely, yes. So we want to make sure that our tax policy is equitable and making sure that all of those benefits are getting to every level.
Yeah, I think what y'all just said provides a solution of how we get utilities to act, to speak their language. If we're talking tax breaks and subsidies and stuff like that, that can really light a fire under people's butts to get acting and moving forward. So thank y'all very much for that. Anne asked if there are any programs for nonprofits like churches to install solar energy. Do y'all know of any?
So as far as I guess kind of municipal or governmental programs, I've not come across any that go toward the nonprofit industry or sector. So I would say, I haven't seen any. Doesn't mean there aren't out there. What I have seen though are foundations. There's one that I just engaged with now that's looking for nonprofits that want to put solar on their buildings. So I think there are more of those, and increasingly more of those that are out there. So that's just, wish I had more to say on that. But, whenever I'm having that conversation with homeowners and businesses, I'm like, yeah, there's incentives for residential and there's incentives for business, but churches and other nonprofits, I haven't seen that from, like I said, the municipal or governmental level.
Yeah, I see Daniel shaking his head no too. So it seems like we're definitely lacking in policies, at least policies and programs on the governmental level for this kind of stuff. So maybe that could definitely be a solution on how to get solar to different nonprofits. What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, we're pushing for a policy in Alabama for third-party ownership, often referred to as energy freedom. And this is largely what it's about, is expanding access for the tax credit to non-taxable entities. So like you can go to the website, energyfreedomalabama.com. There we go. Ruby's got it in the chat.
Yeah.
But that that helps to expand the pie, the people who are eligible for the tax credit. That's why we're doing it. Absent that, you really need a change to the tax code to really make that, get that access out.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, I know that I could keep talking to y'all forever, but since it's, 6:51 at night, I would like to close out with one more question, if that's okay with y'all. Not Nancy, it was Paul had a question in the chat and said, what role does the fact that TVA has put a lot of money into power plants that will only be paid for by being operational for decades play into all of this? Would you like to take a stab at it, Daniel?
Yes, and I will try not to be very long-winded because this is going to get me worked up, but it's a huge deal, right? Paul is hitting on the problem, right? So just a couple of days ago, here comes TVA saying it wants to build 1.5 gigawatts of new gas. Well, what Paul is saying right there is exactly part of the problem with this proposal, right? Here we are going to put two massive gas peakers online that are already unprofitable from a utilities perspective, or I should say from a utility ratepayers perspective, because so many of the things would be better uses of our money, like energy efficiency or demand response or battery storage to help us actually meet that need, assuming that need is even there. But if we put these gas plants online, we got to pay for them for decades. They don't just go away. So if you are the Biden administration who comes out and says, we want zero carbon electricity by 2035, and here is your own federal utility coming out and saying, we want to build 2 new gas units they're going to run probably till 2050 or 2060, these things are completely incompatible. There's another thing that I want to flag for folks is, so, renewable energy has gotten to the price point where many of our older coal units and gas units it's actually cheaper to shut them down earlier than we expected, not run them anymore, decommission them, and build renewables or even renewables plus storage in its place. So that should be done, period. But when we make even worse decisions by putting new fossil fuel infrastructure in right now that we know will only run for a few years, but then we got to pay for it for decades, that's perpetuating the problem, both from an economic and an environmental standpoint, right? So if you look at the local power companies who are looking to leave the Tennessee Valley, they're arguing that a large part of the problem is high wholesale power costs. Where did high wholesale power costs come from? They came from the fact that TVA made a bunch of bad bets on nuclear in the 70s and the 80s that we're still paying for today, and is putting in a bunch of central station power plants that we know aren't going to live to the end of their lifespan. So sorry, I knew I was going to get myself worked up on this, but Paul is exactly right. Like, these bad decisions, these bad bets are driving these costs up. We're all paying for them, and it's slowing our ability to make the transition down because we got all this debt hanging over us that never should have been there in the first place. So, all right, enough worked up from me.
Okay.
There is nothing wrong with you getting fired up. In fact, your energy made me take my flannel off because I'm ready to I'm getting fighting mad. Jason, would you like to close us out with some wise words to Paul's question?
Yeah. I don't know about wise words. I'm probably more, indignant words, as Daniel said. That's a really big point and a big question about, how do you turn the Titanic from the iceberg? That's but the equivalent of what he's saying. You've already put millions and billions of dollars into a sinking ship, and who's going to raise their hand and say, yeah, that was my fault, and we're going to try to turn this around? Like, no one wants to take that. So everyone's just going to, put their head in the sand and keep the blinders on and just say, hey, this is what we, have planned for the last 20 years, and we're going to finish this plan. Never mind the fact that the plan was bad to begin, and it's proven over the years that it was a bad plan because you got to keep sinking money into these things beyond the budget, especially with those nuclear plants. So I'm going to swing for the fences. I was talking with Daniel about this for this call. Two things. One, and it's 6:56. Let me be very quick. One, someone also, you guys have a lot of great information that's been in the chat. I wish we could cover it all. But one, here's where the environmental cost, the carbon price, these things can start to intersect. If we can get people to understand that there's a bigger cost, they're looking at, you're a governmental agency that you're supposed to be for the people, and there's supposed something bigger than just a dollar made. But what about all the asthma that you cause? What about all of the, coal ash spill and all the pollution in the air? All that has a price, and it costs us. So that needs to be factored in when you put out the next gas plant or nuclear plant. What's that total cost, not just to build, but to operate, and what it does to the people that are in that environment that it's in. So that's where the conversation needs to be. It's bigger than just the billions of dollars that you've wasted, but also the healthcare that you're costing us as well. And compare that with renewable energy, and let's see where that shakes out. So swinging for the fences, we've got, as has been said, and I think Bree's my environmental sister. I love her. She, with Energy Democracy, we got a chance to put people in TVA's board that can make a difference. And even here locally in Nashville, the CEO of NES just announced that he's retiring, and effective May of 2022. So there's a guy named Mike Vandenberg that's on the board. He's the kind of guy that needs to be in the spot. He needs to be CEO of NES. We've got to get people in these positions that will just stop the train and actually try to turn the Titanic around, and are willing to do that and have the gumption to really go after this thing. Because status quo, we're just going to keep riding this thing right on into the iceberg, and then look around and say, how did we get here? So, yeah.
We got to hold these companies accountable when it comes down to it, and make sure we give power back to the people and push for green energy jobs. Well, thank y'all so much for everyone, all the participants, for all your knowledge that you've been dropping in the chat, for giving us an hour of your time. Thank y'all so much. And thank you, Jason and Daniel, for everything. This has been a great conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. Yes, I'm going to clap too. Yes. But thank y'all very much. And to those who have additional questions for the panelists, they were kind enough to drop their information into the chat, so you can copy it. But thank y'all so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Abigail. It was great. Thanks for having me.